Put my bag in the front bedroom, Calpurnia, was the first thing Aunt Alexandra said. Jean Louise, stop scratching your head, was the second thing she said. Calpurnia picked up Auntie's heavy suitcase and opened the door. I'll take it, said Jim, and took it. I heard the suitcase hit the bedroom floor with a thump. The sound had a dull permanence about it. Dull permanence is a good word choice there. It's foreshadowing. Have you come for a visit, Auntie? I asked. Aunt Alexandra's visits from the landing were rare, and she traveled in state. She owned a bright green square Buick and a black chauffeur, both kept in an unhealthy state of tidiness, but today they were nowhere to be seen. Didn't your father tell you? She asked. Jim and I shook our heads. Probably he forgot. He's not in yet, is he? No, he doesn't usually get back till late afternoon, said Jim. Well, your father and I decided it was time I came and stay with you for a while. For a while, and make 'em meant anything from 3 days to 30 years. Jim and I exchanged glances. Jim's grown up now, and you are too, she said to me. We decided that it would be best for you to have some feminine influence. It won't be many years, Jean Louise, before you become interested in clothes and boys. I could have made several answers to this. Cal's a girl. It would be many years before I would be interested in boys. I would never be interested in clothes. But I kept quiet. What about Uncle Jimmy? Asked Jim. Is he coming too? Oh no, he's staying at the landing. He'll keep the place going. The moment I said, won't you miss him? I realized that this was not a tactful question. Uncle Jimmy present or Uncle Jimmy absent made not much difference. He never said anything. Aunt Alexandra ignored my question. We're going to add this in under key events. Aunt Alexandra says that she's coming to give Scout a feminine influence, but there's more to it than that. This is one of those times where adults don't always tell the children what they are thinking and what's going on. So we need to ask this question. What is Aunt Alexandra really there for? I could think of nothing else to say to her. In fact, I could never think of anything to say to her. And I sat thinking of past painful conversations between us. How are you, Jean Louise? Fine, thank you, ma'am. How are you? Very well, thank you. What have you been doing with yourself? Nothing. Don't you do anything? No. Certainly you have friends. Yes'm. Well, what do you all do? Nothing. Reminds me of a lot of conversations that young children and even some teenagers have with adults. It was plain that Auntie thought me dull in the extreme because I once heard her tell Atticus that I was sluggish. There was a story behind all this, but I had no desire to extract it from her then. Today was Sunday, and Aunt Alexandra was positively irritable on the Lord's Day. I guess it was her Sunday corset. She was not fat, but solid, and she chose protective garments that drew up her bosom to giddy heights, pinched in her waist, flared out her rear, and managed to suggest that Aunt Alexandra's was once an hourglass figure. From any angle, it was formidable. The remainder of the afternoon went by in the gentle gloom that descends when relatives appear, but it was dispelled when we heard a car turn in the driveway. It was Atticus, home from Montgomery. Jim, forgetting his dignity, ran with me to meet him. Jim seized his briefcase and bag. I jumped into his arms, felt his vague, dry kiss, and said, "Did you bring me a book? Do you know Auntie's here?" Atticus answered both questions in the affirmative. How'd you like for her to come live with us? I said I would like it very much, which was a lie, but one must lie under certain circumstances, and at all times when one can't do anything about them. We felt it was time you children needed, well, it's like this, Scout, Atticus said. Your aunt's doing me a favor as well as you all. I can't stay here all day with you, and summer's going to be a hot one. Here we're starting to get part of the truth. Atticus can't stay with the children all day long. Why might that be an issue? If we think about what's going on in Atticus's life, how the townspeople are going to view that, we've already heard the stories, and Francis made his opinions quite clear. So we know that as the trial gets closer, things are going to get more and more dangerous. Somebody needs to be with the kids. Calpurnia, being an African American, doesn't necessarily offer them as much protection. So if something were to happen to Atticus, they need to have somebody else there with them. Yes, sir, I said, not understanding a word he said. I had an idea, however, that Aunt Alexandra's appearance on the scene was not so much Atticus's doing as hers. Auntie had a way of declaring what is best for the family, and I suppose her coming to live with us was in that category. Why do we think that Scout is pinning this solely on Aunt Alexandra? Probably because she doesn't quite understand what is happening right now, and she refuses to admit that this might be Atticus's idea. Macomb welcomed her. Miss Maudie Atkinson baked a laying cake so loaded with shinny it made me tight. Miss Stephanie Crawford had long visits with Aunt Alexandra, consisting mostly of Miss Stephanie shaking her head and saying, Miss Rachel next door had Auntie over for coffee in the afternoons, and Mr. Nathan Radley went so far as to come up in the front yard and say he was glad to see her. Here we have what we know about Aunt Alexandra is that when it comes to the social decorum and how somebody is supposed to behave as viewed by the other residents of Macomb, she seems to have quite a bit of pull with the other residents, which also probably buys them a little bit of grace. When she settled in with us and life resumed its daily pace, Aunt Alexandra seemed as if she had always lived with us. Her missionary society refreshments added to her reputation as a hostess. She did not permit Calpurnia to make the delicacies required to sustain the society through long reports on Rice Christians. She joined and became secretary of the Macomb Amanuensis Club. To all parties present and participating in the life of the county, Aunt Alexandra was one of the last of her kind. She had riverboat boarding school manners. Let any moral come up and she would uphold it. She was born in the objective case. She was an incurable gossip. When Aunt Alexandra went to school, self-doubt could not be found in any textbook, so she knew not its meaning. She was never bored, and given the slightest chance, she would exercise her royal prerogative. She would arrange, advise, caution, and warn. Let's pull up this vocabulary word, get something in our vocabulary column. So we have the amanuensis society, a person who is employed to write or type what another dictates. So essentially, a scribe or a secretary. But let's look up this other word here. Prerogative. A right or privilege exclusive to a particular individual or class. Prerogative. Right held exclusively by a person or class. We're going to add this in under notes as well. Aunt Alexandra is well thought of and respected in Macomb. She never let a chance escape her to point out the shortcomings of other tribal groups to the greater glory of our own, a habit that amused Jim rather than annoyed him. Auntie better watch how she talks. Scratch most folks in Macomb and they're kin to us. Aunt Alexandra, in underlying the moral of young Sam Merriweather's suicide, said it was caused by a morbid streak in the family. Let a 16-year-old girl giggle in the choir, and Auntie would say, "It just goes to show you all them Penfields are flighty." Everybody in Macomb, it seemed, had a streak. A drinking streak, a gambling streak, a mean streak, a funny streak. Here we have that idea that was so prevalent in Southern society that a person's character is directly derived from the family that they come from. So your characteristics, who you are, is directly influenced by your last name. Once, when Auntie assured us that Miss Stephanie Crawford's tendency to mind other people's business was hereditary, Atticus said, "Sister, when you stop to think about it, our generation's practically the first in the Finch family not to marry its cousins. Would you say the Finches have an incestuous streak?" Auntie said no. That's where we got our small hands and feet. Leave it to Aunt Alexandra to take something that is, at the very least, very odd and paint it as a positive. I never understood her preoccupation with heredity. Somewhere I had received the impression that fine folks were people who did the best they could with the sense they had. But Aunt Alexandra was of the opinion, obliquely expressed, that the longer the family had been squatting on one patch of land, the finer it was. Again, we get back into that southern sensibilities, the gentry. Your value is derived from your family and how long you can trace back your heritage and how respected the family name is, as opposed to what, especially during the Civil War, was a very northern thought, which is that each individual person should be free to determine their own value and worth. Two very different ways of viewing not only human value, but also of determining things like who you associate with. Let's pull up this word obliquely. Not in a direct way, indirect. Well, that makes the Yules fine folks then, said Jim. The tribe of which Burris Yule and his brethren consisted had lived on the same plot of earth behind the Macomb dump, and had thrived on county welfare money for 3 generations. Aunt Alexandra's theory had something behind it, though. Macomb was an ancient town. It was 20 miles east of Finch's Landing, awkwardly inland for such an old town. But Macomb would have been closer to the river had it not been for the nimble-wittedness of one Sinkfield, who in the dawn of history operated an inn where 2 pig trails met, the only tavern in the territory. Sinkfield, no patriot, served and supplied ammunition to Indians and settlers alike, neither knowing or caring whether he was part of the Alabama Territory or the Creek Nation, so long as business was good. Business was excellent when Governor William Wyatt Bibb, with a view to promote the newly created county's domestic tranquility, dispatched a team of surveyors to locate its exact center, and there establish its seat of government. The surveyors, Sinkfield's guest, told their host that he was in the territorial confines of Macomb County, and showed him the probable spot where the county seat would be built. Had not Sinkfield made a bold stroke to preserve his holdings, Macomb would have sat in the middle of Winston Swamp, a place totally devoid of interest. Instead, Macomb grew and sprawled out from its hub, Sinkfield's Tavern, because Sinkfield reduced its guests to myopic drunkenness one evening, induced them to bring forward their maps and charts, lop off a little here, add a bit there, and adjust the center of the county to meet his requirements. He sent them packing next day, armed with their charts and 5 quarts of shinny in their saddlebags, 2 apiece and 1 for the governor. Because its primary reason for existence was government, Macomb was spared the grubbiness that distinguished most Alabama towns its size. In the beginning, its buildings were solid, its courthouse proud, its streets graciously wide. Macomb's proportions of professional people ran high. One went there to have his teeth pulled, his wagon fixed, his heart listened to, his money deposited, his soul saved, his mules vetted. But the ultimate wisdom of Sinkfield's maneuver is open to question. He placed the young town too far away from the only kind of public transportation in those days, riverboat, and it took a man from the north end of the county 2 days to travel to Macomb for store-bought goods. As a result, the town remained the same size for 100 years, an island in a patchwork sea of cotton fields and timberland. With this idea of the history of Macomb, it tells us a little bit about what makes this town interesting. It gives it a little bit of flavor of local color. But it also explains why it's a little bit different than similar towns in its size in the era, the way that people treat each other, and the reasons that you might have somebody like the Finches live there. Although Macomb was ignored during the war between the states, Reconstruction rule and economic ruin forced the town to grow. And we have that Southern idea, again, the Southern language, the war between the states rather than the Civil War. It grew inward. New people so rarely settled there, the same families married the same families until members of the community looked faintly alike. Occasionally, someone would return from Montgomery or Mobile with an outsider, but the result caused only a ripple in the quiet stream of family resemblance. Things were more or less the same during my early years. There was indeed a caste system in Macomb, but to my mind it worked this way. The older citizens, the present generation of people who had lived side by side for years and years, were utterly predictable to one another. They took for granted attitudes, character shadings, even gestures as having been repeated in each generation and refined by time. Let's pull up that vocabulary word. Caste. The system of dividing society into hereditary classes. So again, that Southern idea of your value comes from your family and how old and fine your family is, which was also a big factor for how people justified their treatment of African Americans. When you tear people from their homelands and bring them over on slave ships and take away their sense of family, their sense of identity, you lose that ability for people to determine who their family is, to claim that people have that old inherited wealth, the generational wealth, the generational social value. Thus the dicta, no Crawford minds his own business, every third Meriwether is morbid, the truth is not in the Delafields, all the Bufords walk like that, were simple guides to daily living. Never take a check from a Delaford without a discreet call to the bank. Miss Maudie Atkinson's shoulder stoops because she is a Buford. If Miss Grace Meriwether sips gin out of Lydia E. Pinkham's bottles, it's nothing unusual. Her mother did the same. Aunt Alexandra fitted into the world of Macomb like a hand into a glove, but never into the world of Jim and me. I so often wondered how she could be Atticus's and Uncle Jack's sister that I revived half-remembered tales of changelings and mandrake roots that Jim had spun long ago. These were abstract speculations for the first month of her stay, and she had little to say to Jim and me, and we saw her only at meal times and at nights before we went to bed. It was summer and we were outdoors. Of course, some afternoons, when I would run inside for a sip of water, I would find the living room overrun with Macomb's ladies, sipping, whispering, fanning, and I would be called, "Jean Louise, come speak to these ladies." As I appeared in the doorway, Auntie would look as if she regretted her request. I was usually mud-splashed or covered in sand. "Speak to your cousin Lily," she said one afternoon when she had trapped me in the hall. "Who?" I said. "Your cousin, Lily Brooke," said Aunt Alexandra. "She's our cousin? I didn't know that." Aunt Alexandra managed to smile in a way that conveyed a gentle apology to Cousin Lily and firm disapproval to me. When Cousin Lily Brooke left, I knew I was in for it. It was a sad thing that my father had neglected to tell me about the Finch family or to instill any pride in his children. He summoned Jim, who sat warily on the sofa beside me. She left the room and returned with a purple-covered book on which Meditations of Joshua S. St. Clair was stamped in gold. "Your cousin wrote this," said Aunt Alexandra. "He was a beautiful character." Jim examined the small volume. "Is this the cousin Joshua who's locked up for so long?" Aunt Alexandra said, "How did you know that?" "Why, Atticus said he went round the bend at the university. Said he tried to shoot the president. Said cousin Joshua said he wasn't anything but a sewer inspector and tried to shoot him with an old flintlock pistol, only he just blew up in his hand. Atticus said it cost the family $500 to get him out of that one." Aunt Alexandra was standing stiff as a stork. "That's all," she said. "We'll see about this." Before bedtime, I was in Jim's room trying to borrow a book when Atticus knocked and entered. He sat on the side of Jim's bed, looked at us soberly, and then he grinned. Aunt Alexandra is very upset here because Atticus did not shine up their family's history. He told it pretty straight, flaws and all. Everybody should be able to look at themselves and improve upon themselves or deal with their negatives in an honest fashion, something that Aunt Alexandra very much disapproves of. he said. He was beginning to preface some things he said with a throaty noise, and I thought he must at last be getting old. But he looked the same. I don't exactly know how to say this, he began. Well, just say it, said Jim. Have we done something? Our father was actually fidgeting. No, I just want to explain to you that your Aunt Alexandra asked me. Son, you know you're a Finch, don't you? Well, that's what I've been told. Jim looked out of the corner of his eyes. His voice rose uncontrollably. Atticus, what's the matter? Atticus crossed his knees and folded his arms. I'm trying to tell you the facts of life. Jim's disgust deepened. Oh, I know all that stuff, he said. Jim here thinks that he's getting the birds and the bees talk. That's not what he's getting. Atticus suddenly grew serious. In his lawyer voice, without a shade of inflection, he said, Your auntie has asked me to try and impress upon you and Jean Louise that you are not from run-of-the-mill people, that you are the product of several generations' gentle breeding. Atticus paused, watching me locate an elusive redbug on my leg. Gentle breeding, he continued when I had found and scratched it, that you should try to live up to your name. Atticus persevered in spite of us. She asked me to tell you that you must try and behave like the little lady and gentleman that you are. She wants to talk to you about your family and what it's meant to Macomb County throughout the years so you have some idea of who you are, so you might be moved to behave accordingly. He concluded at a gallop. Suddenly, Jim and I looked at each other and then at Atticus, whose collar seemed to worry him. We did not speak to him. Aunt Alexandra is not happy that Atticus teaches a northern view of personal dignity to the kids. That's that idea then that somebody's value comes not from who they were born as, but who they become through their choices and their actions. She is not a fan of that. Presently, I picked up a comb from Jim's dresser and ran its teeth along the edge. Stop that noise, Atticus said. His curtness stung me. The comb was midway in its journey, and I banged it down. For no reason, I felt myself beginning to cry, but I could not stop. This was not my father. My father never thought those thoughts. My father never spoke so. Aunt Alexandra had put him up to this somehow. Through my tears, I saw Jim standing in a similar pool of isolation, his head cocked to one side. Why does Scout cry? Why is Atticus trying to teach the kids Aunt Alexandra's viewpoint on family? The first one, if you think about the way that people react when they feel like they're losing control of their lives, of their situations, they try to reestablish themselves, and a lot of times they regress in age. They act younger. So even though Scout is, I think she's 7 at this point, I could be wrong. She is acting younger than she normally would be acting. She's typically really precocious, but here she's acting very childlike, even for a child. But why is Atticus trying to teach the kids and Alexandra's viewpoint on the family? Well, one of these is kind of answered in the question. Is the big view of the big moral of the story is to be able to see things from somebody else's perspective. But we have to actually apply that as well. We know what Atticus is going through. We know that he's aware of the risks of what might happen if the town takes umbrage with him defending Tom Robinson. So why is he trying to teach Aunt Alexandra's views? Because he knows that if something goes wrong, that she's going to be the one in charge of them, and they should be prepared and aware of what's happening. There was nowhere to go, but I turned to go and met Atticus's vest front. I buried my head in it and listened to the small internal noises that went on behind the light blue cloth, his watch ticking, the faint crackle of his starched shirt, the soft sound of his breathing. Your stomach's growling, I said. I know it, he said. You'd better take some soda. I will, he said. Atticus, is all this behaving and stuff going to make things different? I mean, are you. I felt his hand on the back of my head. Don't you worry about anything, he said. It's not time to worry. Very strong statement there. It's not time to worry. So Aunt Alexandra coming is not time to worry. Him taking the case is not time to worry. The murmurings of the other townsfolk is not time to worry. So if none of those make it time to worry, then we know that when it is time to worry, it must be very serious indeed. When I heard that, I knew he had come back to us. The blood in my legs began to flow again, and I raised my head. You really want us to do all that? I can't remember everything finches are supposed to do. I don't want you to remember it. Forget it. He went to the door and out of the room, shutting the door behind him. He nearly slammed it, but caught himself the last minute and closed it softly. As Jim and I stared, the door opened again and Atticus peered around. His eyebrows were raised, his glasses had slipped. Get more like Cousin Joshua every day, don't I? Do you think I'll end up costing the family $500? I knew now what he was trying to do, but Atticus was only a man. It takes a woman to do that kind of work. We're going to ask a few questions before we end this chapter here. What did Atticus mean by becoming like Cousin Joshua? Why did he change his mind about the code of behavior? And finally, what does the last line in the chapter mean? This will be answered in a little bit after the trial, where Scout finally starts to fall in line with those views of how a man or a woman should behave, and particularly they're traits that can generally be ascribed to anybody, especially now. What sort of things does she mean by the way that we're supposed to behave in public? How are we supposed to behave depending on how other people treat us? Aunt Alexandra has kind of built up this armor from public criticism based on her behavior. Follow things to the line, and no one will have a way to complain about you or to judge you, because she knows what is going on with the family. She knows the way that things are going to be, so she knows that she has to build up this concept here. Let's actually add this into our notes. No, let's add this into our vocabulary. This concept that she has called social capital. There we go. The value that other people place on you based on your actions according to the norms and mores of society. If you behave in a certain way, do other people find you dependable? Do they feel like they can trust you? Are you viewed as one of those valuable people of society? Do you embody those traits of a fine old family or of someone who is of impeccable character? Or are you viewed as untrustworthy? Are you viewed as questionable in your character? So Atticus has a lot of professional clout. He has a very good stead within the community. People think very highly of him, but he doesn't fall so much in line with those social mores, with those social norms. He's very of the common people. Aunt Alexandra is very different, and in a society that says that if you are supposed to be from a rich, fine old family, then you have to demonstrate that in the way that you treat other people and in the way that you act. She has more clout in that way. So they know that they're going to need every single tool at their defense in order to survive what's about to come at them. It's very, very subtle writing there. It's what makes this book so very excellent, is that they'll throw out things like this, and you have to really, really dig in and think about what they mean. We're going to end chapter 13 there, and we'll continue with chapter 14.